Hey guys, welcome back to Psalms to God and the Journaling Hour. This is episode 3, and since we are actually doing a Bible study tonight, I decided that tonight we would kick it off. Blah, blah, blah. We'll cut that out. Hey guys, welcome back to the Psalms to God YouTube channel. This is the Journaling Hour, and this is episode 3 in this series. The first couple of episodes were just setting up the journal, but tonight we're actually going to do a Bible study on the woman of Abel, or the Wise Woman of Abel. So I wanted to kick this episode off with a prayer so that we can go into the Word under the Spirit. So, Father, thank you for allowing us to have the technology to come together and share your word, your information, to learn new skills, to journal, to become closer to you, and to express that in creative forms. I pray that today you will speak to us, that you will teach us and lead us and convict us and work on our hearts to help us be more like the person that you created us to be and more like you. I pray that we will take away from this study what you would have us take away. In your Son, Jesus' name, amen. All right, so now I'm getting ready to start in on the study that we're going to be talking about today. And the first thing I noticed was the ghosting from the Ecoline plus pin that I used on the previous page. I called this out in the previous episode, but this is when I really noticed how much it ghosted and was mildly worried about what that was going to look like as I continued to journal. But I quickly realized that it wasn't a problem, and you'll notice when we get to the end of the page that you can't see it at all, so it wasn't really a problem at all. For this page, I'm going to be using the Monami Plus Pen 3000. I'm using a gray-black pen and a blue pen. I also have the pink pen out on standby because I use those for scripting, and I know that I'm going to be doing both pink and blue highlights and lettering and things like that on this page, and I wasn't sure which one I would need for the scripting or if I would even be doing any scripting on this page, so I had them at the ready. But in this case, I only used the blue Monami Plus Pen 3000, and of course, I'm using the gray-black just over here to set up a margin on the edge of the page. This margin is going to contain the page number as well as just kind of like general information so that I can look at this page at a glance and know what's on it. It's not really necessary because I'm writing the headings so big that it's going to be pretty obvious what's on that page. But it's something that's generally found in dictionaries and encyclopedias. Like if you have a dictionary and you flip it open at the top, it's going to tell you that, this page contains the words feather through food. And you know that if what you're looking for is between that alphabetically, then it should be on that page. And I don't know, it just seemed like I should set this up the same way. So that's what I'm doing over here in the margins. On top of the Monami Plus Pen 3000, I will be using the Monami Live Color. Again, still using pink and blue. I'm going to be using the bullet nib, and I'm pretty sure I also used the fine liner end, even though I could have used the Monami Plus Pen fine liner for that text too. I'm just switching it up because it's easier because that's the pen that's going to be in my hand. But whichever works for you or whatever materials you choose to use, that works fine. I will also have some text that's written with Pigma microns. So I have the O2 and then I have the O8 nearby. The O8 is a lot thicker, so I'm using that to write out the letter A here in this margin. I don't think I used it anywhere else on the page, but I am using the O2 to make kind of like bolder text for when I want like a bold black text. So you will see that in a couple of places as well. And then for highlighting, I'm still using the Ecoline very light-handedly, more light-handedly than I did on the page before. I could have switched to like a zebra mild liner or my Bic highlighters, but I was convinced that these would still do the trick, and they did. I also didn't know if I wanted to do like some brush lettering with them, so like I said, I didn't change those up. So those are some of the supplies in terms of pens that you'll see me pulling out as I'm journaling. And I wanted to just get that out of the way. They're all listed in the description box. So if you're following along, you can always pause and check out the description box to see which pens I'm using. But I did want to put that out up front so that you know, and I don't have to like interject while I'm trying to talk about the woman we're studying to tell you what pen I've just pulled out. Another thing I want to talk about is how I place stickers. So I'm still using the RongRong set that I was using in the last episode. I'm still going to have that roll of pink stickers or pink themed stickers and blue themed stickers. And what I did was I basically just placed them on the page. I did write one title first, and then I came back and just picked stickers that I liked and placed them where I thought I wanted them to go on the page, so that then as I write out my notes, I can write them out around the stickers. Now, I've gone through different stages in terms of how I place stickers. I've gone through stages where I do all of the notes first, and then I put stickers in the white space that I have left. And I've gone through the stages like I'm doing tonight, where I put down the stickers first, and then I fit the text to the stickers. It really just depends on how you think about things, like how you prefer to do things. For me, it does seem to be a little easier to put the stickers down first when I use large stickers. So like the stickers of the women, they are pretty tall. I think they're maybe like 4-5 inches tall. Maybe not a full 5, maybe like 3 or 4 inches tall, but they take up a pretty good amount of space. And so if you want that sticker to be, for instance, on the left side, then your text has to be indented over for it to fit there. And you're not going to know where to place the text until you put the sticker down. And similarly, if you want it on the right side, it's a little bit easier because you can kind of leave a box. But because they're not perfect squares, it's still kind of hit and miss of like how it will fit. And then when you go back and try to fit a sticker in that shape, sometimes you end up with the stickers you don't want, or like you're limited on what sticker you can place. And so since I want a nice mix of blue and pink, I wanted to have more control over which stickers I was using, so I stuck them down first, and then I'm going through and journaling out the content. So I think that's all I have to say about the actual journaling aspect, and I think now we can get into the meat and potatoes of it and the actual study. So the first lady that we're going to study tonight is the Wise Woman of Abel. She is not given a name in the text, but she is referred to as a wise woman. The text explicitly calls out that attribute for her, and we're told that she lives in the city of Abel, and that's how we get that moniker. Her story is told in 2 Samuel chapter 20, and it really doesn't get around to her and her role in things until verse 16, but I highly recommend you read the entire chapter to get a sense of what's happening and why she's in the position that she's in. Nonetheless, we're not going to read all of the chapter in this video because I think that is excessive, and I don't think you guys would really enjoy that. So if you want to take that time right now before we really get into this study, then absolutely pause and then get into the text and read it. But if you want to do that later, you can just make a note to yourself to go back and read the other verses. I'm going to read from verse 14 so that we do get some context and don't just jump straight in. Because if you read just starting at verse 16, it's not going to make the most sense. I mean, like, as you keep reading, it'll start making sense, but it's really hard. And I'm a firm believer that you should read verses in context. We have a huge problem in general, but especially within the church, that a lot of verses are taken out of context, and that causes a lot of problems. And historically, the church has purposefully taken verses out of context for people in power to abuse people, and this has caused a lot of harm in a lot of different ways. And not only is it causing direct harm, for instance, as they used different passages to try to justify enslaving black people, or people trying to use verses to justify mistreatment of women, or whatever, like I said, there's tons and tons of examples of this. But on top of the abuse and the harm that it's done to specific people groups, anyone who knows those histories has a critical view of the religion as a whole. And because a lot of times people can't separate the religion, the organization, the actual the actual text, what's actually written there, a relationship with God himself, these things all typically become conflated. And so people who experience church hurt or experience, you know, negative views of the church itself, then typically have negative views of God, negative views of the Bible. The Bible is very complex. It's a very long book. And so if you aren't a believer, a lot of times you don't have motivation to read it for yourself. If you think that it's evil and causing harm, you're not going to go seek out a relationship with God. And so the consequence of messing up verses and taking them out of context is that we turn people away from real relationship with the Most High. And that is why I feel very strongly that you should put things in context. Now, I know I went off on a whole different tangent that has nothing to do with the woman of Abel, but I wanted to put that out there because I am reading some verses to you and not all of them, but I want to encourage you to read for yourself. In every case, whether I am teaching you something or talking about something, or whether it's somebody else, always pray for yourself, always read for yourself, study for yourself, do your due diligence to make sure that the Holy Spirit is telling you the truth. I am human. I am subject to mess things up just like anyone else, but also we each have a responsibility to learn for ourselves and to make sure we're aware of what the text says. So I would never purposefully take things out of context, but I do, like I said, I just want to put those disclaimers out there because things can happen, and I want everyone to be aware that there is more context than just the verses that I'm going to read. So I'm going to read 2 Samuel chapter 20, starting in verse 14, and I'm going to read from the NASB. It says, "Now he went on through all the tribes of Israel to Abel, that is Beth Makkah, and all the Beerothites. And they assembled and went after him as well. And they came and besieged him in Abel Beth Makkah, and they built up an assault ramp against the city. And it stood against the outer rampart, and all the people who were with Joab were wreaking destruction in order to topple the wall. Then a wise woman called out from the city, 'Listen, listen, please tell Joab, come here that I might speak with you.' So he approached her, and the woman said, 'Are you Joab?' And he answered, 'I am.' Then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your slave." And he said, "I'm listening." Then she spoke, saying, "In the past they used to say, 'They will undoubtedly ask advice at Abel.' And that is how they ended a dispute. I am one of those who are ready for peace and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city, even a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord?" Joab replied, far be it from me that I would consume or destroy. Such is not the case. But a man from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri by name, has raised his hand against King David. Only turn him over, and I will depart from the city. And the woman said to Joab, "Behold, his head will be thrown to you over the wall." Then the woman wisely came to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they were dispersed from the city, each to his tent. Joab also returned to the king at Jerusalem. So what has happened is that this man who is an outlaw and who has come up against David has angered David, and he has fled from Jerusalem, from the hill country of Ephraim, and landed in this city called Abel. Joab is pursuing after him. Joab is a general in David's army, and he gets to the city of Abel and basically just starts laying siege to it in order to get to Sheba. But this wise woman stops to have a conversation with him and is basically like, "Why are you destroying our city?" And this is when she learns what has actually happened. And then she says to the people, "Hey, let's just give him this man that he's looking for and he'll leave us alone." So they do that and he leaves them alone. That is, the shorthand summary of what has happened. And I think it's interesting because there's so many parallels to today. I can think of personal examples that would go along with this. But more importantly, I can think of global examples of this. So in our society today, we have what we call extradition policies. And essentially, what happens is if you commit a crime in the state of California, and then you go to New York, and the police in New York find out that you're there, they will absolutely arrest you and hold you until or ship you back to California or whatever, because we're in the same country and there's basically an understanding there. There is paperwork and they have to go through, this police department has to talk to that police department, and it's not exactly straightforward. But without a shadow of a doubt, if you commit a crime in one country, you can be held liable for it in another country. State. When it comes to countries, it's a little bit more nuanced. So countries that we are allies with, like Canada or England, they typically will extradite you if you are caught there after you've committed a crime. So if you're in the United States and you commit a crime and then you get on a plane and go to England, and then they find you in England, England will 100% ship you back to the United States to face trial in the United States. Other countries where we aren't on the best terms, like say Russia, they aren't obligated to send you back, and they may not. So an example of this would be Eric Snowden. The US government was extremely angry that he stole files from them. He fled the country and went to Russia. And of course, Russia did not deport him back to the United States. The United States, went through a whole struggle trying to get to him because there's no agreement in place between the United States and Russia. This same tension that exists between the United States and Russia looks like what was happening between the inhabitants of Abel and Joab and his army. There wasn't an existing treaty. There was no point of contact where Joab could just walk up to the gate and be like, "Hey, I need to talk to so-and-so, the mayor of the city." And then he would just tell this person, hey, I'm looking for so and so. He is hiding out in your city. I need you to, give him to me, or I need you to execute justice on him. Instead, he just attacked the city, thinking that the city, I guess, was in cahoots with Sheba, the man that was on the run. And it took this woman asking him why he was attacking the city for it to be made known that he was just looking for this man who had wronged King David. And the woman's like, yo, we're loyal to the king. We'll give him to you. So they go, she tells everyone else, like, hey, we just need to find this man, kill him, give Joab the head, and, then we're out of this. Now, it's a bit gruesome that they literally decapitated his head. And I'm not really sure why they decided to kill him and give him the head as opposed to try to arrest him and give him to Joab directly. I'm assuming that he was just dangerous. There are different cases for all kinds of things. Like, some people, even in our society today, some people get apprehended and they get put handcuffs on them, and some people end up dying in the process of being arrested. Again, whole different tangent we can go off on into this and about how different people are treated differently, etc., etc. That is not really the point. We're going to focus on the Wise Woman of Abel, because this is a Bible study about women and how they played into the story. But this is also what I mean about reading for context and getting deep into the word. Like, this is a very short passage, and you can go in a lot of different ways, and you can see how some of this is being projected into things that happen today. Like, there's relevancy here for lots of different topics, which is also why I end up spending hours and hours studying texts when I actually sit down to study. But I think the really big things that I want to call out that stand out to me when I read this passage is that not only is she explicitly called wise, she's the person who thinks about going and doing this. No one else, either they didn't think to go, they were afraid to go, or they thought that she was the best person to go because she wasn't threatening, right? There's a huge difference. If you are, a military official and you're sent to secure a location, there's going to be a huge difference in how you react to, say, a child coming up to talk to you, or an old woman coming up to talk to you, even maybe an old man, versus an able-bodied young person, right? Like, I mean, imagine if you have somebody who is from like an arm, like a soldier, somebody who is built like a soldier, looks like they could be a soldier, and they're approaching saying they want to talk to you. You're going to have your guard up. You're going to be unsure if you can trust them, etc., etc. But you're not necessarily going to be as guarded, like I said, if a child comes up to you, or if like an elderly person comes up to you. You're not going to think that they're going to attack you or something like that. So maybe there was a discussion and she just seemed like the best person to go. But the Bible itself calls her a wise woman, which leads me to think it was her idea, and she was also the only one who had courage to do this. Not so much that there was a conversation happening and like her being nominated to go do this. So that's one thing that stands out to me. Another thing that stands out to me is that after she talks to Joab and understands what's going on, she goes and talks to the people of the city and gets them on board with her plan. It takes a very special person to come up with an idea to tell people and have them follow them, right? A lot of people talk about leadership skills, and just having an idea is not what makes you a leader. There are a lot of people who have great ideas, but they can't get anyone to follow them. it takes a very special set of skills, a very special know-how set of like relationship building to convince people to do the things that you want them to do, to gain like the loyalty of people, that they'll do what you ask them to do, even if it's dangerous, even if it puts them at risk, right? In this situation, like, they have Joab's word that he will leave them alone if they deliver him this person. But what if Joab lied to them, right? You're trusting her that she trusts this man who's saying he's going to leave you alone. But also, like, how difficult is it going to be to apprehend this man and kill him, right? And are we trusting that that's the right thing to do? Like, if someone just walked up to you right now and said, hey, we need to kill this person and cut his head off and give it to this other person, and that's the right thing to do, you'd have a lot of questions. I hope you'd have a lot of questions. And so, like, the reputation that she must have had and the number of people she had to have known to be able to accomplish and move forward with this plan that she and Joab had come up with is also tremendously large, right? Like, we're seeing a lot of different traits being expressed in this woman that we're studying. So on my journaling page, I started out with a brief summary, which we just went over, of what happened in the story and some of the things that stood out to me. And then I started talking about the different traits that I saw embodied in the woman of Abel. And so some of the words that I wrote down wisdom, which she's actually called wise twice in the text. And so I also called out when I was journaling that not only am I saying that she has wisdom, but I was told explicitly in the text. And I want to take this moment to mention that when I'm looking at the traits of the women that I'm studying, in some cases, we are told that they're faithful. We're told that they're wise. We're told that they're pretty or that they're beautiful or whatever. And the Bible actually gives us some kind of trait or description of the person. But then there are traits that you see that are not explicitly mentioned, but you can infer them just by what's happening. So, for instance, we see that she has wisdom, but we can infer that she has the trait of being a diplomat. She has diplomacy, and she has this trait of mediation, similar to Abigail, who I already have a study up on her, but it's another A name that we will be jumping into. This is just evidenced by her actions, right? And the outcome of her actions. Another trait that we see that's not explicitly mentioned, but again inferred by her actions, would be boldness. I mean, I've never approached a general. I've never been in a city that was being attacked and then went towards where we're being attacked and was like, hey, I want to talk to your leader. That's bold. That's brave. It's bold. It's scary. It takes a very special person, regardless of your gender, to be able to go and do something like that. And honestly, if you're that bold, you have to have some level of faith as well. You're either hopeless and you don't care if you die, or you have a lot of faith that what you're doing is right and that God is going to protect you as you go into this. And again, back into implicit versus explicit things that are called out in the text. In the text, she says, I am faithful in Israel. So we're told that she is a woman of faith and that she has a strong faith. She also calls herself as being peaceful. These are two traits that are fruits of the Spirit, right? So again, we're seeing a lot of correlation in this being a wise woman and her being a godly woman, being godly and being wise, being tied together. And then, of course, you having this faithfulness and peacefulness, the ability to be a diplomat, being brave and bold within that. And then the final set of traits that I wrote was the aspect of being respectful or being reverent. This is something that I think we're going to probably harp on a lot. I think when you talk about being a woman of God, people very much are quick to talk about submission, meekness, et cetera, et cetera. Those traits are very much attributed to being a godly woman. And we do see some of that here. It's just, I don't think we talk enough about the nuance and the balance of her both being respectful and reverent and in some ways like meek, but also being very bold and brave and essentially being a leader because she's the one who approaches Joab and then she's the one who tells them that this is what they should do and enacts something that creates the good outcome for the city. So she is a leader, but she also is very respectful when she calls out to Joab. She says that she is her slave. In this translation, it'll say servant. In other translations, we see this a lot with different women that, they introduce themselves as your handmaid, your servant. And it's really interesting if you do like a word study. I did not actually do a word study on the word slave here. I kind of wish I did, but it'll probably come up later and I'll probably do the word study then. But the word that we use today that we say like minister, that actually also means like to serve. And so there's this idea of saying like, like I'm humble, like coming to someone not as, boastful or like, yo, you need to listen to me because I'm somebody. It's like, hey, like I'm coming to you in respect, right? I'm coming to you as somebody who is in service to you, someone who I see you as a leader, I see you as the general, and I'm coming to you in respect, right? It's like calling a police officer to denote that you recognize that they have authority and you're humbling yourself to their authority, but also saying, hey, can I speak to you? This is reminiscent of Esther approaching the king, right? She wasn't supposed to, right? There's a boldness there, is that you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, and you're speaking out of turn in some ways, but you're doing it in a manner that's not boastful, right? This is the nuance that I really wanted to get into as I was doing these studies, or really that just hit me as I got into these studies. I'm not sure I really expected to see that, but it does bring like a lot of clarity to me as I study it. And when I pray and I try to remember, like, yes, sometimes maybe I am being called to say something or to do something, and that thing that I'm supposed to do or say may be more on the bold side. It may be more on the side of a leadership type of a action, but that doesn't mean I have to do it in a bold way per se. Like I can still do it in a humble and respectful manner. So that's some of what I wrote down when I was talking about like different traits that I saw within the Wise Woman of Abel. But of course, as I'm looking at these traits, as I'm thinking about the story, there's also a lot of things that I don't know. And so I created a section called Unknowns. Some of you may not necessarily be used to studying this way. If you've listened to any of my, I guess, Bible studies that are on the channel, you know that this is a big thing for me. There's a lot of times that we just kind of assume things, but there are things in the Bible that we just don't know. And sometimes we'll never know. Sometimes it's because maybe we haven't read enough. There's sometimes I ask questions about passages and maybe a day later I'll read a different passage that answers that question. Sometimes it's years later that I read a different passage that answers that question, and I just hadn't made the connection yet. But sometimes there are things that we just will never know. Like that information is not present in the text. It will always either be speculation that we can get from historical documents and from people studying the word and trying to put together cultural context and things from the time period and history and stuff like that. And sometimes it's things that we'll never know, right? But it's important to be aware of what we don't know, because sometimes those things change how we look at the story, like the connotation or the coloring of the story. So, for instance, at the beginning, I talked about how if you're a general and somebody's approaching you, you're going to react a little differently if it's a child versus a old lady or something like that. And when I hear the wise woman of Abel, honestly, the first image that comes to my head is that of an elderly lady. And I think it's because of the word wise. When I think of wisdom, I think of the elderly. And there's even a verse that connects, I think, like gray hair and wisdom. And so in my mind, that's what I'm seeing. But we aren't actually told any information about this woman's age. We're just told that she's a wise woman. Now, based on the translation, I would assume that means that she was not a child, but I don't necessarily know at what age they started referring to women as women versus like a girl or a child. That's just like in English, we don't really have a whole lot of, I guess we do have Miss and Mrs., but it's kind of like senorita versus senora being, thrown through the text or something. Like, I don't really necessarily know at what age, like, in the United States, I guess if you go with Miss versus Ms. versus Mrs., technically speaking, MRS is supposed to be for a married woman. MS is supposed to be for a divorced woman or someone you don't know the relationship status of. But what I see typically is it's usually just for, it's usually used more heavily as you get older, with MISS being used for single women. But technically speaking, like I would be an MISS because I'm a single woman. And if you knew that I was single, then I'm not divorced and you know my status, so you would call me MISS. But because I'm 37, most people would write MS because MISS is seen as childish. So it usually is only used for people who are like under 16 or under 18 or something like that. And that's a cultural thing. And so, like, when we see the word woman in Jewish culture, at what point would they have switched from referring to her as a girl versus a grown woman, right? This is where I'm like, we don't necessarily know how old she was. Was she, a 30-year-old wise woman, or was she like somebody's grandmother in her like 90s? We don't know. It doesn't change what she did, but it's something to think about in terms of when you're looking at someone and you're thinking about, would I do that? And you think about wisdom. Is this some kind of wisdom that she had in like her 20s versus is this years and years of wisdom that she's only acquired now that she is, in her 80s, right? There is a difference, I guess, of expectation. And kind of along the same lines of talking about her age is that of her family status. So in that same vein, we're not told that she has a husband or that she doesn't have a husband. We're not told that she's a widow, or that she is a virgin or anything that would give us any kind of hint as to how old she was from her familial ties. But also, because we don't know if she's married or, widowed or what, we also don't know if she has any children. And I think there's so many places you can go with this, right? Because you're seeing that she's wise, that she's able to broker peace, she's doing some leadership. But like, if she's married, where was her husband while she was talking to Joab? Like, where was her husband while she's spreading the news and saying like, hey, we need to go get this Sheba guy and hand him over, right? If she had kids, where were they in this? Were they older? Were they younger? Did they help her? Was her husband somebody that was encouraging her? Like, was she standing there being like, hey, I think I should go talk to him and find out what he's doing? And her husband's like, yeah, you're really good at talking to people. You should go, you should go do this. Or was her husband like, I did not tell her to go over there. Like, right? Like, and then, like I said, maybe she was single. Maybe she didn't even have a husband. We don't know because it's not told. And again, it doesn't necessarily change anything about the text, but it's an interesting thing to think about because, like I said, I feel like when we grow up, particularly in the church, or you have a culture in mind, we kind of implicitly agree that these things have happened or assume. So, like I said, in my mind, I saw her as being an elderly woman. And with that, I'm thinking that, maybe she's a widow, right? Maybe her husband is already passed on and her children are probably grown. It's very easy for us to just paint this picture based on the connotation of certain words in the passage. And before you know it, your mind has painted a picture of this woman that's not necessarily accurate. And so the reason I go through these unknowns and talk through them is to remind myself that there are a lot of possibilities of who this woman could have been as a person and what her life could have looked like, which again broadens how we should see this for ourselves. Like, you don't necessarily have to be an elderly woman to be wise and to be like the wise woman of Abel. You don't necessarily have to be a wife or a mother to be like the wise woman of Abel, but it also doesn't exclude those people, right? That's more of where I'm going when I stop and think about that. And the last two unknowns that I wrote down were the tribe that she belonged to within Israel and her social status. I think it's hinted at that she must have had some level of social status because she was able to tell people what to do and they did it. But it doesn't really say. And again, this goes back to some of the other questions I had. Like, what if she was the equivalent of like the mayor's wife, right? Like, you're going to have more access to people who can make things happen as quote unquote the mayor's wife than you would as the homeless person that sits on the side of the street. But we see we'll see other passages where God uses someone like that. I mean, like the Samaritan woman, she wasn't necessarily a woman of great reputation, and yet still he came to her and, performed essentially a miracle by telling her about her life, and then she went and spread the gospel, and people listened to her too. So we don't really know. That's all I can say. So, as I was, thinking about that, and as we finish up with the unknowns, I did a word study on the word wise. I mentioned word studies earlier and said that I didn't do a word study on the word servant or slave, and that I'll probably do that in the future. The word study that I did choose to do from this passage was the word wise. Now, if you've never done a word study, they're very, very interesting. I've done large scale ones and tiny ones. This one's kind of like more of a tiny one, but we're reading an English translation. The key here is that it's a translation. The original text was not written in English. The Old Testament, which is what we're reading from, was written in Hebrew. I think there's some Aramaic in the Old Testament. I know there's Aramaic in the New Testament, but mostly Hebrew. And then that is translated to English. And of course, you have Old English, like the King James Version, which is still going to be slightly different than how we talk today. And then you have more modern versions, like the NASB that I read earlier in the episode. When I do word studies, what I do is I find an interlinear Bible and I look up what the original word was before it was translated into English. And then I look up that in a concordance and see what that word is supposed to mean. And so I use things like Blue Letter Bible. I think there's a concordance and an interlinear Bible in eSword. I think there's also one on in Bible Hub. These are all things that you can look up online. Um, but I use that to find the word and to get the concordance and to look up the initial or the original definition of the word that's being used there. A lot of times, if you use something like Blue Letter Bible, you'll be able to see where else in the text that word is used. So it'll show you other verses, and then you can get more context for how that word is used in general. Or you can gather more of like the connotation of the word and how it was used by the people of that time period and the biblical authors. Another thing that I will do sometimes is to take that further and look up the word that the translators chose. So for in this case, wise is the word that's translated to wise could mean intelligent, skillful, or artful. And this word appears in 137 times, right? So you can go to all of these verses, and sometimes it'll lean towards intelligent, sometimes it may lean more towards like skillful or artful. You'll see things like this when they discuss like creating things for the temple and stuff like that. But in this case, the translators chose to use the word wise, not intelligent or skillful or artful. And so I was like, well, what makes someone choose the word wise? And, I might look up the word wise in an English dictionary to see, all of the meanings of that. And when you kind of dig deep into words like this, a lot of times you will find a lot of meanings that you did not expect, and it will unlock more layers of the text. So I like to do Bible studies. I am not doing super, super in-depth studies in this journal. That doesn't necessarily mean that I won't also be looking these words up in multiple languages. Another step beyond looking it up in English, for instance, this is in the Old Testament, so we have a Hebrew word. You can also look in the New Testament and find the word wise and look at the Greek word that's used as well and see if that lines up with the Old Testament Hebrew word, right? Like you can get really deep into it and go down the rabbit hole when you're doing word studies. But when you do that, of course, if you're going to journal it, it's going to take up a lot more space. And I didn't want to fill up too much space talking about what the word wise meant because I didn't want to distract from the main or the larger portion of the study. So I just stuck with the Hebrew word, which is what I just mentioned. And then I stuck it off to the side and put it in like a little box to highlight it so that it would pop out. And that's probably how I will do most word studies that I do throughout this journal. Now, after I do this final, box or this final line of studying this word, then I am going to go back and reflect on how this woman relates to us today. Like, what should I learn from what I just read? And I think that's an important thing to do during a Bible study, whether it's about a particular person or whether it's about an event or even if it's just a couple verses, right? At the end of the day, like, yes, sometimes it's just about knowing who God is, but sometimes there's relevance for us. Like, maybe there's something I need to work on that was revealed in this passage. Maybe I was convicted about something, or maybe I'm just noticing how this plays out in our society. I already told you a couple of examples about like extradition and stuff that I noticed about how her story lines up with things that we still have today. And so I started writing out mentally, what did this say to me? Like, how did it speak to me and how do I think it applies for us today? And so I wrote, if we see that we're being attacked And I put attacked in quotation marks because I wanted to highlight the fact that, I mean, in her case, this was a literal attack. Literally, someone was attacking their city. But sometimes we are spiritually attacked or emotionally attacked, mentally attacked. And it's not that somebody is physically assaulting us, but that people are just playing games or things aren't necessarily going the way we would like them to. And we feel attacked, like metaphorically. But when we're in those types of situations, sometimes we're in those situations because we're harboring someone or something that goes against God. So maybe we are protecting a person in our life or allowing a person in our life to do things that we know are wrong, and we're not speaking out about it, or we're not holding them accountable for the thing that we're doing. And in doing so, we're not allying ourselves with God's kingdom. We're allying ourselves with the enemy. And the reason that Joab was willing to destroy the city is he thought that they were siding with the enemy. Once they made their allegiance known, we're allied to David, then it's like, oh, okay, well, in that case, help me eradicate this problem. Once they did that, it's like, yeah, I'm cool with you, right? It's the same concept. I am allied to the Most High God. So my actions should speak to that. The company I keep should speak to that. The things that I'm interested in, the movies I'm watching, all of these things should testify and speak to my allegiance to the Most High God. And if I allow a person or something that is not of God to dwell within my city, I say that in quotation marks, but like to dwell within my space, within my brain, within my vicinity, and I take that on as part of me, then that could cause a problem. So if God is knocking on my door saying, hey, you have this person close to you, or you have this object, or this hobby, or whatever it is that you're doing that I don't like, we should be willing to hand it over. But sometimes we may need to ask, right? The same way the wise woman approached the wall and approached Joab and was like, why are you coming after me? Sometimes we need to pray and ask God, like, hey, why am I being attacked? And then God will answer just like Joab did, and tell us, like, hey, you need to get rid of XYZ. And then when we're told we need to get rid of XYZ, we need to swiftly get rid of XYZ. We need to cut off the head. Metaphorically, don't cut off a person's head, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying nip it in the bud, have the evidence, like I have separated myself fully from this thing that is not of God. So I ended up actually highlighting the last section of this for us today that I wrote because I thought it just really spoke to me. And it says, more importantly, if we have a godly solution that will bring about peace, we should speak up. Like I said, a lot of times we can get hyper focused on giving up things and correcting our behavior and acting in a holy manner. But I don't think we talk enough about knowing solutions and not acting. And that's really why I ended up going back and highlighting this. Because even as I'm like talking to you guys, I just went off on my whole tangent about like, if we have people in our vicinity, if we have objects and hobbies and things, we got to get rid of them. And I feel like you go to church and you hear those sermons and sometimes it's discouraging because you like the things that you like and you don't want to get rid of them. That's not an excuse to hang on to them, but it is kind of disheartening. But we don't necessarily talk as much about facilitating peace, right? One of the things that is so beautiful about the wise woman of Abel it's not that she got this man killed because she followed the commands of Joab. That's not the beauty of the story. The beauty of the story is that by simply communicating, she was able to barter peace and save the lives of all the people in her city. So sometimes you know what needs to be said or what needs to be done in order to mediate a situation, and we're afraid to do it. We're afraid to approach the person that needs to be approached. We're afraid to act on what needs to be done. But that is what we are called to do. That's what made the wise woman of Abel wise, is that she knew of a peaceful solution and she went about implementing said peaceful solution. And so I really enjoyed studying her, and I loved learning about her. So, um, so I thought I had recorded footage of me doing the journaling for this woman named Abby or Abi. She is also listed as Abijah. It depends on what translation you have. But I actually did not record that. So I guess we're not going to do her tonight. I might talk, well, not might, but I will talk about her in the next episode when I have that text written out. One of the things that I've been playing with as I've been doing this journaling series and as I'm trying to figure out how this will work is that some women, like the wise woman of Abel or someone like Ruth, you have a lot of information and we can talk about them for the duration of the journaling hour, which is what happened with the wise woman of Abel. But some women, it's just like a mentioning of, it's a very short blurb, and we're not going to spend that much time talking about them. And in fact, the amount of time it takes me to talk about them, like, will be such a fraction of the time it's taking me to write it out. So it would be really weird because I could summarize it really quick and not, like, be done writing about that person, and then I'm moving on to the next person. And then what I'm talking about won't really line up with what you're seeing on the screen. But also, there will inevitably be some level of redundancy in watching me do the journal because I'm going to carry the same font throughout the letter A. I'm going to carry out the same color theme, the same sticker theme. And so a lot of the journaling part is going to look the same. So those of you who are here for just the journaling, you know, you may get bored of this section. You may just want to see, oh, I want to see what's next in the next section. Kind of how, like, with bullet journaling, they do each month, right? And then those of you who are here primarily for the Bible study, which hopefully you're here for both, but preferably you're here more so for the Bible study than for the journaling aesthetic. But, you know, like I said, those women won't have super in-depth studies, so it's not like I need to just dedicate one episode to them or something like that. So what I'm probably going to do, the next episode, there will probably be a recap at the beginning where I show you stuff that I journaled off camera, and we'll do like a summary kind of synopsis about those women and what I learned about them. And then we'll have a particular woman that we study at that time. I don't know how many women in each section there will be. I don't know how much time it will take to talk about each person. That will be kind of a guess. And I can kind of tell just by the number of verses that are attributed to women or like what is discussed. So I'll try to be better about knowing up front so that, for instance, in this episode, I can tell you who I think we're going to talk about in the next episode so that you can go ahead and do those on your own time if you're following along. But I am, like I said, in the description is the list of women so that you can study on your own time. And we'll just try to keep in sync, but I don't know how feasible that will be. At the worst case, I am recording videos at least a week in advance. So when I publish the video and set it as a premiere, which I've been trying to do on Sunday or Monday, I will put the list of women that I studied or that I covered in the video in that description box so that you will know where we're starting and like how to line up with what I'm going to be talking about. That being said, thanks for sticking in, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.